Hey guys, so you think being a Renaissance painter sounds romantic? Mixing paint and creating masterpieces for wealthy people? Let me stop you right there. Your studio smells like a butcher's shop mixed with a chemist's bin, because you're grinding up paint minerals that smell like rotten eggs. Your fingers are stained with different colours that won't wash out, and some of those colours are literally poisonous. You've got a headache from breathing mercury fumes all morning, and one of your customers just said that he wants his wife's face completely redone on his painting because it looks too much like his mistress, and his wife is asking questions. If you enjoyed this, smash that like button and subscribe for more historical reality checks. I'm genuinely curious to know where you're watching from, so leave me a comment telling me your location and what time it is right now. So let's step into the world of a Renaissance painter and find out exactly why you'd be begging to return to your current job within a week. Your day starts before the sun comes up because natural light is everything in this job, and you need to catch every possible hour of it. There's no alarm clock. Instead, you've trained yourself to wake when it's still dark and freezing cold, and your room feels like the inside of a damp cave. The stone walls sweat moisture, and your blanket is about as warm as a used dishcloth. You peel yourself out of bed, and your feet hit a floor so cold it feels like stepping onto a frozen lake. There's no central heating, no little radiator humming in the corner. Just you, the cold and the dim light of a candle that costs more than you'd like to admit. You get dressed in the same clothes you wore yesterday because washing is a weekly event if you're lucky, and your outfit smells like it's been marinated in old workshops. There's a distinctive pong of linseed oil mixed with turpentine that's soaked into the fabric and won't leave. You pull on your shirt and it's stiff in places where you wiped your hands yesterday. Your shoes are leather, worn thin, and they've moulded to your feet in ways that aren't entirely comfortable. One of them has a seam that's been rubbing the same spot on your ankle for 3 months, and you've got a permanent rough patch there that catches on your stockings. Breakfast isn't some nice coffee and toast situation. You're getting a chunk of bread that's gone a bit hard, maybe some cheese if you're doing well that week, and ale. Yes, ale for breakfast, because the water in the city is about as trustworthy as a merchant's promise. The ale is weak and tastes like someone washed their socks in it, but it won't give you the galloping trots, so down it goes. The bread tastes like it's got grit in it, because the flour was ground with stones, and sometimes bits of stone end up in there. You're crunching through breakfast like you're eating at the beach. Then you head to your workshop. If you're successful enough to have your own space, congratulations, you're still freezing, because heating a room with high ceilings is basically impossible. If you're working in a master's studio, you're sharing space with 3 other painters, 2 apprentices who are fully grown men and still learning, and possibly someone's cousin who's visiting and won't stop asking questions. The room smells like a combination of a hardware shop and something dyed behind the walls. That's because your pigments come from genuinely bizarre sources, and they all have their own special stench. The workspace itself is cluttered with more jars, pots and containers than you can count. There are brushes soaking in cups of murky liquid that looks like swamp water. There are pallets with dried paint built up in layers like geological formations. There's a mortar and pestle that's seen more action than a soldier's boots, and it's crusted with residue from grinding minerals. The floor is streaked with colour, where things have dripped or been stepped in and tracked around. It looks like a rainbow had a fight with a mud puddle and they both lost. Your first task of the day is preparing materials, because Renaissance painting isn't about cracking open some tubes of paint. Nothing comes ready to use. You start by grinding pigments, and this is where things get properly medieval. Need red? You're crushing up cinnabar, which is mercury sulfide, and the dust makes your head feel like it's stuffed with wool. Need yellow? You're grinding up a mineral called orpiment, which contains arsenic, and you're trying not to breathe too deeply. Need a nice bright red for fancy details. You're pulverizing dried cochineal insects, and the smell is like crushing a handful of old potpourri that's been sitting in someone's attic for decades. The grinding process is exhausting. You're hunched over a stone slab with a heavy stone muller in your hand, going in circles for what feels like hours. Your shoulder starts aching after the first 10 minutes. By the time you've got a usable pigment, your arm feels like you've been in a wrestling match with a bear and lost. Your fingers are cramping, your wrist is sore, and you've inevitably got pigment dust all over yourself. It's in your hair, on your face, under your nails, and definitely in your lungs. Next, you mix the pigment with a binder. If you're doing tempera, that's egg yolk. Yes, egg yolk. You crack eggs, separate the yolks with your fingers, and mix them with the pigment powder. Your hands smell like raw eggs mixed with mineral dust, which is a combination that no amount of washing will fully fix. The mixture has to be just right. Too much egg, and it's glossy and weird. Too little, and it won't stick properly. You're basically a cook in a very toxic kitchen. If you're doing oil painting, which is becoming fashionable, you're mixing pigments with linseed oil. This stuff smells strong and botanical, like someone squeezed a plant too hard. It gets everywhere. On your hands, your clothes, the table, the floor. It doesn't dry quickly, so you're constantly worried about touching things and smearing oil where it shouldn't be. You've ruined more sleeves than you can count by absent-mindedly wiping your hands on yourself. Once your paints are ready, you face the actual painting, which sounds like the fun part until you remember what it actually involves. You're working on a wooden panel, or a canvas that you prepared yourself, which meant sizing it with glue made from boiled animal bits. The smell of that process lingered for days and made the whole workshop reek like a tannery. Then you applied layer after layer of gesso, which is chalk mixed with more animal glue, and sanded it smooth. Your hands were raw from sanding, and you inhaled so much chalk dust you were sneezing white for 2 days. Now you're finally putting paint on the surface, but you're not just slapping it on and calling it done. Renaissance painting is all about layers. Thin layers, transparent layers, glazes that take forever to dry. You paint a bit, then you wait, and wait, and wait some more. Oil paint can take days to dry enough to add the next layer, so you're constantly juggling multiple projects. You're working on 5 different paintings at once because while one is drying, you need to be doing something else or you're just burning daylight. The physical position of painting is its own special torture. If you're working on a large altarpiece, you're standing for hours on end. Your legs ache. Your feet feel like they're made of stone. Your lower back starts sending up distress signals around hour 3 and doesn't stop. If you're doing detailed work, you're hunched over, squinting, holding your breath to keep your hand steady. Your neck feels like someone's tightening a vice on it. Your eyes are straining in the dim light, and you're getting a headache that sits right behind your eyeballs and won't leave. Painting tiny details like the embroidery on a sleeve or the individual hairs in a beard means holding a brush with just a few hairs on it and keeping your hand absolutely still while you make minute strokes. Your hand cramps into a claw shape. You have to stop and shake it out, flexing your fingers and trying to get the feeling back. Then you get right back to it, because the light is fading and you need to finish this section before you lose the good sun. Let's talk about your patrons, because these are the people paying your bills, and they're also the source of most of your headaches. You don't just get to paint whatever you want. You're not some free artistic spirit creating for the love of expression. You're a tradesman taking commissions, and your clients have opinions. Strong opinions. Baffling opinions. Opinions that change every time they visit your workshop. A wealthy merchant commissions a religious painting for his family chapel. Great, sounds straightforward. He wants the Virgin Mary, some saints, maybe an angel or two. You discuss the composition, agree on a price, get a deposit, and start work. 2 weeks in, he visits and decides the Virgin Mary should be wearing blue. Not just any blue, ultramarine blue. The expensive stuff made from lapis lazuli that cost more than gold. Literally more than gold. This pigment comes from mines in Afghanistan, travels thousands of miles, and costs an absolute fortune. Your patron wants it because blue is fancy, and he wants everyone to know he can afford it. You renegotiate the price because there's no way you're eating the cost of ultramarine. He agrees, grumbling about it like you're the unreasonable one. You acquire the precious lapis lazuli, which comes in small chunks of deep blue stone streaked with gold-coloured pyrite. You spend 2 days grinding it according to a complicated process that involves kneading the powder in a mixture of wax, resin and oils to extract the purest blue. Your hands are blue up to the wrists. The colour stains your skin and won't come out. You look like you've been manually strangling a cartoon character. You mix the ultramarine with your binder and carefully apply it to the Virgin's robes. It's gorgeous, deep, luminous, expensive looking. You're rather proud of it. The patron visits again, and now he's decided the composition is too crowded. Can you remove one of the saints? Can you make the angel smaller? Can you shift everything to the left a bit? You're smiling through gritted teeth and explaining that oil paint doesn't work like that. You can't just shuffle things around. You'd have to paint over what's there and start sections again. He looks disappointed, like you're being deliberately difficult. Another patron, a minor noble, commissions a portrait of himself. He wants to look dignified, powerful, wealthy. You do your best. You paint him with a strong jaw, clear eyes, fine clothing. You've made him look better than he does in real life, which is part of the job. He comes to see the finished piece, and his face falls. He doesn't like his nose. His actual nose, which is right there on his actual face, is apparently fine, but the painted version is unacceptable. It's too big. Can you make it smaller? You explain that you've painted his nose accurately, perhaps even a touch more refined than reality. He doesn't care. The nose must be smaller. You spend an afternoon repainting a nose to be less accurate because the man paying you doesn't like reality. Patrons also have strong feelings about symbolism. Everything in a Renaissance painting means something. The type of flowers in the background, the position of hands, the colours of clothing, the objects on a table. Your patron wants specific symbols included: a dog for loyalty, lilies for purity, an hourglass for the passage of time, a skull for memento mori. Except he wants the skull tucked in the background where it's tasteful, but also visible enough to make the point, but not so visible that it's morbid. You're playing a game of symbolic hide-and-seek while trying to maintain a balanced composition. The contracts for these commissions are detailed and legally binding. You're not just agreeing to paint something. You're specifying exactly which pigments you'll use, how much gold leaf will be applied, how many figures will be included, and what quality of materials you'll provide. Using a cheaper pigment than agreed can land you in legal trouble. Substituting an apprentice's work for your own can get you sued. The contract might specify that you personally must paint the faces and hands, while assistants can do the backgrounds and clothing. You're legally obligated to spend hours on tiny details, while your workshop helpers do the boring bits. Payment is its own adventure. You get some money up front, usually a third or half. The rest comes on completion, assuming the patron is happy, assuming he hasn't changed his mind about the whole thing, assuming he hasn't run into financial trouble and can't pay. You're chasing payments like a medieval debt collector, politely reminding wealthy people that you've finished their painting and would quite like the rest of your money. Some patrons pay promptly, others drag it out for months. You're owed money by half a dozen people at any given time, and you're trying to balance your own expenses while waiting for nobles to get around to paying you. The workspace politics are exhausting too. If you're working in a shared studio, there's a hierarchy. The master painter gets the best spot near the window. The most experienced assistants get the next best positions. You're jockeying for access to good light, like office workers fighting over the desk near the window. Someone's always in your space, borrowing your tools without asking, using up the expensive pigments you bought with your own money. There's passive-aggressive notes left on the workbench about cleaning up after yourself and not leaving brushes to dry out. Supplies are expensive and constantly running out. You're managing an inventory of bizarre items like you're running a medieval apothecary. Brushes made from squirrel hair, hog bristles and other animal fur. Wooden panels from specific types of trees, properly aged so they won't warp. Canvas that needs to be woven tight enough for painting. Gold leaf so thin you can see through it. Sold in tiny books and costing a fortune. Varnishes made from tree resins dissolved in alcohol. Drying oils that speed up or slow down how fast paint sets. Solvents that strip paint and also strip the feeling from your fingertips if you're not careful. You're constantly calculating costs. A commission needs to pay for materials, your time, your assistant's wages if you have any, and still leave you with profit. Underestimate the materials, and you're working at a loss. Overestimate, and the patron thinks you're trying to fleece him. You're doing mathematics in your head while trying to be creative, which is like trying to paint while someone's reading you their tax returns. The competition with other painters is relentless. You're all fighting for the same pool of wealthy patrons. Someone else just finished an altarpiece that everyone's talking about, and now your work looks old-fashioned. A younger painter is doing portraits cheaper than you, and you're losing clients. Another workshop has figured out a new technique for making fabric look realistic, and suddenly everyone wants that look. You're keeping up with trends while also trying to develop your own style, and also trying to eat and pay rent. Workshops are located in the city, usually near other artisan trades. Your neighbours are metal workers, leather workers, tailors, all doing their own noisy, smelly business. The street outside is a flowing river of humanity, animals, carts, and questionable substances. The noise is constant, hammering from the blacksmith 3 doors down, vendors shouting about their goods, carts clattering over cobblestones. Someone's always having an argument in the street. You're trying to concentrate on painting a serene Madonna, while outside someone's yelling about the price of fish. Temperature control is a fantasy. Summer in your workshop is brutal. The room heats up like a brick oven because you've got big windows for light and the sun pours through them all day. There's no air conditioning, no fan, nothing but you, your sweat, and your increasingly irritable temper. You're dripping on your work, which is a genuine problem because sweat drops on wet paint create interesting effects that absolutely nobody wants. You're constantly wiping your forehead with a rag that's already soaked, which just redistributes the moisture rather than removing it. Your clothes stick to you in ways that make moving uncomfortable. The fabric clings to your back, your underarms, behind your knees. You're peeling your shirt away from your skin, and it just slaps back down like it's glued there. The heat makes the paint behave differently. It's runnier, harder to control. The oils separate and get slippery. You're fighting with your materials while also fighting the urge to just lie down on the floor until autumn. The smell in summer is something else entirely. All the usual workshop odours intensify. The linseed oil reeks stronger. The turpentine fumes make your eyes water. Add in human sweat from multiple people working in close quarters, and you've got a stench that could knock over a horse. Opening windows helps a bit, but then you're letting in street smells, which include horse droppings, rotting vegetables from the market, and whatever the tannery up the street is doing that day. You're choosing between suffocating in your own workshop stink or inhaling the greatest hits of urban medieval funk. Winter brings opposite problems. The room is freezing. Your fingers go numb, which makes holding a brush nearly impossible. You're trying to paint fine details when your hands feel like blocks of wood attached to your arms. The paint thickens in the cold, becoming stiff and uncooperative. You're mixing in more oil to keep it workable, which affects how it dries later. You're wearing gloves with the fingers cut off, which helps a tiny bit, but mostly just makes you look like a freezing person wearing broken gloves. The windows that give you beautiful light in summer are now letting in drafts that cut through the room like invisible knives. You've stuffed rags in the gaps, but the wind finds every tiny crack and exploits it. There's a constant faint whistle of air sneaking through places you can't quite locate. You're huddled near a small brazier that provides a pathetic amount of heat and fills the room with smoke. Your eyes sting, your throat scratchy, you're cold and smoky simultaneously, which is a combination that nature never intended. Let's discuss the actual physical toll this work takes on your body. Your hands are a disaster. The skin is stained with pigments that never fully wash out. You've got a permanent rainbow under your fingernails. Your palms are rough from handling wooden panels and canvas. Your fingertips are calloused from holding brushes for hours every day. Some pigments are drying and crack your skin, leaving painful splits that catch on everything. You've got mysterious rashes on your wrists from contact with various substances. Your back is in permanent rebellion from the hunching and standing. There's a knot between your shoulder blades that's taken up permanent residence. Your lower spine feels like it's been compressed by about 3 inches. You straighten up after hours of work and things crack in ways that sound alarming, but have become normal. Stretching provides about 30 seconds of relief before everything tightens up again. Your eyes are strained from squinting at details in imperfect light. You're getting headaches that start behind your eyes and spread out like someone's tightening a band around your skull. By evening, you're seeing halos around candles, and your vision's slightly blurry. You're blinking constantly, trying to moisten eyes that feel like they've been left in a desert. There are no eyeglasses to help with fine detail work. If your vision's going, you're just struggling through with raw determination and lots of squinting. Your feet and legs ache from standing on hard floors. There are no cushioned mats, no supportive shoes, just you and flat stone or wooden floors that show no mercy. Your ankles swell by evening. Your knees hurt. The soles of your feet feel bruised. Sitting down after a long day of standing is such intense relief that you actually groan out loud like someone's grandfather. The respiratory issues from breathing pigment dust and fumes are developing slowly but surely. You've got a cough that never quite leaves. Your lungs feel tight some mornings. You're clearing your throat constantly, and what comes up is sometimes tinted with colour from whatever you were grinding yesterday. This is slowly poisoning you, but nobody really understands that yet. People just think painters are naturally a bit frail and prone to coughing. It's just part of the job, like having paint-stained hands and strong opinions about colour theory. Food during the workday is whatever you can grab quickly. You're not stopping for a proper meal because daylight is precious. You're eating bread, cheese, dried fruit, things that don't require plates or cutlery. You're holding food in one hand and a brush in the other, taking bites between brush strokes. Inevitably, you drop crumbs into your paint. You're fishing bits of bread out of ultramarine and pretending it didn't happen. Your lunch tastes like turpentine because your hands smell like turpentine and you're eating with those same hands. Drink breaks mean watered wine or ale. Sip from a cup that probably has paint residue on the rim because everything in this workshop has paint residue on it. You're ingesting trace amounts of toxic minerals with every meal and beverage. Again, nobody really grasps the full horror of this. Lead poisoning, mercury exposure, arsenic accumulation. These are happening in slow motion while you're focused on getting the highlights right on a saint's halo. The social aspect of the job is peculiar. You're skilled labour, respected to a degree, but you're not nobility. You're in this weird middle zone where you interact with wealthy patrons who see you as a useful tradesman, and you work alongside other artisans who are your actual peers. The nobles talk to you like you're slightly above a servant, but definitely below them. They're friendly enough when they want something, but you're very aware of your place in the social hierarchy. Other painters are simultaneously your colleagues and your competition. You share tips and techniques because there's a community of practice, but you're also trying to win the same commissions. There's camaraderie mixed with rivalry. You genuinely admire another painter's work while also being slightly bitter that he got the church commission you wanted. You drink together at the tavern and complain about patrons, then you're both bidding against each other for the next job. The apprentices in your workshop, all grown men learning the trade, are helpful but require management. You're teaching them techniques while also making sure they're not wasting expensive materials or ruining panels you've prepared. One of them is naturally talented and picks things up quickly. Another has been grinding pigments for 2 years and still can't get the consistency right. You're patient because you're trying to be a good teacher, but internally you're screaming because he's just ruined a batch of expensive vermilion by grinding it too fine. Guild membership is mandatory and comes with its own set of headaches. The Painters Guild has rules about everything. Who can sell paintings? What quality standards must be met? How apprentices must be trained? When meetings are held? What fees must be paid? You're attending guild meetings where old men argue about regulations for hours. You're paying dues that come out of your earnings. You're following rules that sometimes seem designed purely to create bureaucracy. Religious content dominates the work because the church is the biggest patron around, along with wealthy individuals wanting religious pieces for private chapels. You're painting saints over and over. Mary appears in about half your commissions. Jesus as a baby, Jesus as a man, Jesus on the cross. You've painted the entire life story multiple times. Angels, apostles, martyrs, you know them all. You could paint St. Sebastian tied to a post in your sleep. You've done the Annunciation so many times you've lost count. This gets repetitive in ways that make your brain want to escape your skull. Yes, the subject matter is important and meaningful to people. Yes, you're creating devotional art that serves a spiritual purpose. But also, you're painting the same scenes over and over with minor variations. This Madonna has her hand positioned differently than the last one. This angel's wings curve up instead of down. You're finding tiny ways to keep yourself interested while fulfilling commissions that are fundamentally similar to the previous dozen. The theological accuracy matters intensely to patrons and church officials. You can't just paint whatever. St. Catherine needs her wheel. St. Peter needs his keys. The Virgin Mary needs to be wearing specific colours in specific contexts. Get a detail wrong, and you'll hear about it from someone who considers themselves an expert on iconography. You're memorizing symbolic attributes like you're studying for an exam, because getting them wrong means repainting. Nudity appears in religious and mythological scenes, which you'd think would be exciting until you're actually painting it. The human body is complex and difficult to render accurately. You're working from memory, from sketches of statues, occasionally from real people if you can convince someone to model. But mostly you're reconstructing anatomy based on second-hand knowledge and hoping it looks believable. Painting realistic skin tones means mixing multiple pigments and building up translucent layers that suggest the warmth of flesh. It's technically challenging and time-consuming. Female figures require particular attention because you're often working with male models or no models at all. Women of respectable status aren't posing without clothing, so you're improvising. You paint a male model and then adjust proportions and soften features to make it feminine. This leads to some anatomically interesting results that don't quite look like any human who's ever existed. But the style is somewhat idealized anyway, so everyone accepts that painted people look like smoothed out versions of reality. Painting fabric and drapery is its own specialized skill. Wealthy patrons want their expensive clothing rendered accurately. That means painting silk that shimmers, velvet that absorbs light, brocade with intricate patterns, fur trim that looks soft and three-dimensional. You're studying how fabric folds and creases, how light reflects off different textures, how weight affects the way cloth hangs. You're spending hours on a sleeve, building up layers of color and highlights to make flat paint look like dimensional fabric. Gold leaf application is a process that requires steady hands and infinite patience. You're gilding halos, decorative borders, background details, anything that needs to gleam with heavenly radiance. First, you apply a special base layer called bowl, which is reddish clay mixed with glue. You burnish it smooth. Then you apply a thin layer of adhesive called mordant. Then you carefully place sheets of gold leaf so thin that breathing too hard will send them flying across the room. Gold leaf sticks to everything except what you want it to stick to. It clings to your fingers, your tools, your face. You're working in a room with no air movement, because even a slight breeze will ruin everything. You're holding your breath while positioning tissue-thin gold that tears if you look at it wrong. Once it's down, you burnish it with a smooth stone or a dog's tooth. Yes, a dog's tooth, to make it shine. The result is gorgeous, but the process is maddening. The burnishing itself takes ages. You're rubbing the gold with firm pressure to make it adhere properly and bring up the shine. Your hand cramps, your arm gets tired. You're hunching over tiny detailed areas, burnishing in small circles, checking the reflection to make sure it's even. Miss a spot, and it looks dull compared to the rest. Over-burnish, and you might damage the underlying layers. It's a balancing act that requires the kind of patience that most humans don't naturally possess. Mistakes happen, and fixing them ranges from straightforward to nightmarish depending on what went wrong. Smudge some wet paint, you can wipe it carefully and redo it. Mix the wrong color, you're repainting that section. Drop your brush and splatter paint across a nearly finished panel. You're having a small crisis while figuring out if you can incorporate it into the design or if you need to remove it somehow. Oil paint doesn't just wipe away once it's on there. You're scraping gently with a blade or painting over it and hoping the layers don't get muddy. Larger disasters mean starting over or abandoning the piece. Crack develops in the wooden panel. Depending on severity, you might be able to fill and hide it, or the whole panel is ruined. Paint mixed incorrectly and it's not drying properly even after weeks. You're scraping off what you can and redoing it, or eating the cost of materials and time. A patron rejects the finished work for some subjective reason and refuses to pay. You're stuck with a painting you can't sell to anyone else because it was made specifically for him. Time estimates are always wrong. You think a commission will take 2 months and it takes 4. Complications arise. Patrons change requirements. Layers take longer to dry than expected. You get sick and lose a week of work. Another commission comes in that pays better, and you shift focus. You're juggling timelines and making promises you hope you can keep, while knowing that something will inevitably delay everything. The workspace is also your sales room. Patrons visit to check on progress, and they're seeing your studio in all its chaotic glory. You're trying to look professional while standing in a room that smells like a chemistry experiment and looks like a paint bomb exploded. You've tidied up a bit, moved the worst messes out of sight, but there's only so much you can do. The patron's picking his way across a stained floor, eyeing the clutter, while you're showing him the unfinished painting and explaining what the next steps will be. These visits are performances. You're explaining your artistic choices, justifying colour selections, walking the patron through symbolism and composition. You're managing expectations and egos. You're nodding seriously while the patron suggests something that would ruin the painting, and then you're gently steering him toward a better idea while making him think it was his suggestion. It's diplomacy mixed with art direction, and it's exhausting. Some patrons understand and appreciate the work. They trust your expertise and let you make decisions. These are the dream clients. Others micromanage every detail and visit constantly to offer input. They're standing behind you while you work, making comments. They're pointing at sections and asking why you did it that way. You're explaining artistic technique to someone who doesn't paint, and they're nodding but clearly not understanding, and then they're still suggesting changes. The contract might include penalty clauses for late delivery. Miss the deadline, and you're paying a fine or forfeiting part of your fee. This adds pressure to an already stressful process. You're racing against time while also trying to maintain quality. Rush too much, and the work suffers. Take too long, and you're losing money. You're working by candlelight into the evening, which is bad for your eyes and dangerous because open flames near turpentine is a disaster waiting to happen. Personal hygiene takes a backseat to work because washing thoroughly is a production. There's no shower, no running water. You're heating water over a fire if you want it warm, and that takes time and fuel. A full bath means filling a tub bucket by bucket, and you're not doing that daily. You're doing that when you absolutely have to, which might be once a week if you're particularly cleanly, or less often if you're practical about these things. In between proper washes, you're doing what's called a bird bath. A quick wipe down with a wet cloth, hitting the important areas and calling it done. The cloth comes away tinted with whatever pigments you've absorbed through your skin that day. You're perpetually slightly grubby in a way that's normal for the time, but would horrify your modern self. Under your nails is a lost cause. The pigment stains don't scrub out, and you've stopped trying. Your hair is a repository for dust and pigment particles. You're running your hands through it absent-mindedly while thinking, and your hands are never totally clean, so you're just distributing more colourful substances. Washing hair properly requires significant effort and lots of water, so you're doing that infrequently. You wear a cap or cloth wrapped around your head while working, which helps a bit, but also makes you look like someone cosplaying a medieval tradesman, because that's exactly what you are. Dental hygiene is whatever you can manage with a cloth and maybe some herbal powder. Your teeth are not the gleaming white that modern people expect. They're yellowed and possibly missing a few. Toothaches happen, and there's not much to do except suffer through or have the tooth pulled by someone whose main qualification is owning the right kind of pliers. You're chewing carefully, avoiding the side that hurts, and hoping it doesn't get worse. Shaving is done with a straight blade and no mirror, or a polished metal surface that gives a vague reflection. You're going by, feel more than sight. Cuts happen. You're stanching them with cloth and getting on with your day. Some painters just grow beards because it's easier than regular shaving, And then they've got paint in their facial hair as well. Everything becomes a canvas for accidental pigment application. Laundry is an occasional event, not a routine. You wear clothes until they're properly filthy, then you wash them or pay someone to wash them. The washing process is brutal on fabric. Clothes get beaten against rocks, scrubbed with harsh soap, and generally treated like they've committed crimes. They come back clean but rougher and more worn. Your nice clothes, the ones you wear when visiting patrons, get washed carefully and infrequently to preserve them. Your work clothes are written off as permanently stained and just get washed enough to prevent them from walking away on their own. The layers of clothing trap heat and sweat. You're wearing a shirt, possibly a vest or doublet, hose or breeches, and everything's tied and buttoned and laced. Getting dressed is a process. Using the toilet means undoing multiple layers, which brings us to the delightful topic of sanitation. There's no bathroom. There's a chamber pot in your room, or a trip to the communal privy if you're somewhere with that facility. The privy is a wooden seat over a pit, shared by multiple people, and it smells exactly how you'd imagine. The stench is eye-watering. You're breathing through your mouth trying to make this quick, while flies buzz around with aggressive interest. There's no toilet paper. You're using scraps of cloth or leaves or whatever's available. This is not a dignified experience. You're balancing over a hole, hoping the wooden seat doesn't give way, trying not to think about what's below. Back in your workshop, the chamber pot situation means you're periodically emptying containers of waste into the street or a designated waste area. This is just part of urban life. Everyone's doing it. The streets have a central gutter that's flowing with a mixture of rainwater, waste, animal droppings, and miscellaneous fluids you don't want to identify. You're stepping carefully and still occasionally getting unpleasant substances on your shoes. Disease is a constant background threat. People get sick and die with alarming regularity. There's no germ theory, no antibiotics, no real understanding of how illness spreads. You're just hoping you don't catch whatever's going around. When you do get sick, you're suffering through it with bed rest, and maybe some herbal remedies that may or may not help. Serious illness can mean weeks of lost work and income, or it can mean death. There's not much middle ground. Minor injuries are common, and you deal with them yourself. Cuts, burns from candles or hot wax, splinters from wooden panels, scrapes and bruises from moving heavy frames. You're washing them with wine or ale because that seems to help prevent festering, and you're wrapping them with cleanish cloth. Infection is a real risk, and you're watching injuries carefully for signs of redness or swelling. Most heal fine, some don't, and then you're seeking help from a physician or barber surgeon, neither of whom inspire tremendous confidence. Your living quarters are likely near your workshop or above it, if you're established enough to afford that setup. The space is small, one room or maybe two if you're doing well. Furniture is minimal and functional. A bed, a table, a chair, a chest for storing possessions. The bed is a mattress stuffed with straw or wool on a wooden frame. It's not comfortable by modern standards. The mattress develops lumps and flat spots. The straw rustles every time you move. You're sharing it with fleas. Fleas are inevitable. Everyone has them. Your bed has them. Your clothes have them. You're scratching bites that itch like fire. The bites are small red welts that appear in clusters, usually around your waist, ankles, anywhere clothing is tight. You're trying not to scratch them open because that leads to sores. You're losing this battle because they itch so intensely that scratching is involuntary. Your legs are dotted with bite marks in various stages of healing. Lice are also a possibility, setting up residence in your hair and clothing. You're feeling itchy just thinking about it. The eggs stick to hair shafts and have to be combed out with a fine-toothed comb, assuming you own one. This is a tedious process that requires help if you're thorough. You're sitting while someone goes through your hair section by section, and it's about as fun as it sounds. Some people just shave their heads to deal with lice, which solves that problem but creates the new problem of being bald in an era without effective hats. Sleep quality is poor. The mattress is lumpy. The room is either too cold or too hot. Noise from the street continues late into the evening and starts early in the morning. You're hearing drunks singing on their way home, carts rolling past before dawn, animals making animal noises, neighbours arguing through thin walls. The darkness is complete when you blow out your candle, the kind of dark that modern people never experience thanks to streetlights and device screens. You're lying there in absolute blackness, listening to the city, trying to fall asleep despite discomfort and noise. Dreams are probably wild because your brain is processing both artistic composition and mild toxic exposure from pigments. You're having vivid, strange dreams about paintings coming to life or colours that don't exist. You wake up and lie there for a moment trying to figure out what was real. Then your bladder reminds you it's full, and you're fumbling for the chamber pot in the dark, still half asleep. Morning stiffness is intense. Your back hurts before you even get up. Your hands are sore. Your feet are tender. You're creaking out of bed like someone twice your age, and you're not even that old. This job is aging you in ways that aren't entirely visible, but that you feel every single day. You're stretching and trying to work out the kinks before starting another day of the same physical challenges that created the stiffness in the first place. Travel to acquire materials is necessary because not everything's available locally. You need specific pigments, particular types of wood, quality brushes, gold leaf from suppliers who actually know what they're doing. This means trips to other parts of the city, or even other cities entirely. Medieval travel is its own adventure and discomfort. You're walking most places because hiring a horse costs money, and you're saving that for materials. Walking through the city means navigating streets that are narrow, crowded, muddy in wet weather, and dusty in dry weather. The cobblestones are uneven. You're watching your footing constantly to avoid turning an ankle or stepping in something unfortunate. The crowds are thick in market areas. You're shouldering through masses of people, all of whom smell like they haven't bathed recently, which is accurate. Body odour is just the ambient smell of humanity mixed with livestock, food, smoke and urban funk. Street vendors are shouting about their goods, creating a wall of noise. Someone's selling fish and the smell hits you from 20 paces away. Another vendor has vegetables that are starting to turn, priced to move before they're completely inedible. There's a bakery pumping out the actually pleasant smell of fresh bread, which is a brief respite before you pass the butcher and get hit with the iron tang of raw meat and the sight of carcasses hanging in the open air, collecting flies. The trip to the pigment supplier takes you through various neighbourhoods, each with its own character and smell. The tanner's district reeks of the chemicals used to cure leather, a smell so intense it's almost a physical barrier. You're breathing through your mouth and walking quickly. The metalworkers area is loud with hammering and hot with forge fires. The textile quarter has the smell of dye vats, which is pungent and chemical and not entirely pleasant. Your pigment supplier is a specialist who imports and sells materials to painters. His shop is small and crammed with jars, boxes and packets of every colour imaginable. The shelves are dusty and slightly chaotic. He knows his stock by memory and pulls items without needing to check labels. You're discussing what you need, and he's showing you options. The lapis lazuli is expensive enough that he keeps it in a locked box and only brings it out for serious buyers. You're negotiating prices because everything's negotiable. He starts high, you counter low. You meet somewhere in the middle, both pretending you're unhappy with the deal, even though this is exactly the price you both expected. You're buying pigments in small quantities because cost adds up fast. A little bag of vermilion, a packet of yellow ochre, some lead white, the precious lapis lazuli. He wraps them carefully and you're tucking them into your bag, already calculating what you can make with these supplies. The walk back is slightly paranoid because you're carrying valuable materials through crowded streets. Theft is common. Pickpockets work the busy areas. You're keeping your bag close and your hand on it. Someone bumps into you and you're immediately checking that everything's still there. It is. They were just passing in a crowd. But your heart rate's up and you're more alert now. You stop at a brush maker who crafts brushes from various animal hairs. His workshop smells like animal and glue. He's showing you brushes in different sizes, explaining which fur works best for which purpose. Squirrel hair for soft blending, hog bristle for firm strokes, sable for the finest details, expensive and worth it. You're testing them on a piece of scrap paper, feeling the spring and point. You select a few that feel right and add them to your purchases. Gold leaf comes from a gold beater who pounds gold into impossibly thin sheets. His arms are muscular from the repetitive hammering. He's selling the finished leaf in small books, each sheet separated by paper. You're buying enough for the current commission and hoping you don't waste any because this stuff costs more than you want to think about. He wraps it carefully because even rough handling can damage it. By the time you're heading back to your workshop, you've spent a significant chunk of your commission advance on materials. This is normal, but always slightly alarming. You're walking back through the same crowded streets, tired from the round trip, trying not to jostle your supplies. Your feet hurt, your legs are tired. You're looking forward to getting back and actually using these materials. But first you've got to navigate the final stretch through the market district during peak hours. The market is chaos. Vendors, shoppers, animals, carts, performers, beggars, pickpockets, and people just standing around blocking the way. You're weaving through gaps in the crowd, excusing yourself, occasionally getting stuck behind someone who's decided to stop suddenly for no apparent reason. There's a performing juggler who's attracted a crowd, blocking half the street. You're detouring around them while someone's chicken escapes and causes a commotion. Finally, back at your workshop, you're climbing the stairs with your supplies, unlocking the door and feeling that mix of relief and fatigue. You're unpacking your purchases and storing them carefully. The pigments go on shelves where you can find them. The brushes get added to your collection. The gold leaf goes in a drawer where it won't get crushed. Now you can actually get back to work, except you've lost half a day to acquiring materials and you're behind schedule. Commissions overlap because you can't afford to have gaps in income. While one painting dries, you're working on another. While you're waiting for a patron's approval to continue, you're starting a third. You're mentally juggling multiple projects at once, remembering which stage each one is at, what needs to happen next, whose deadline is most urgent. It's like playing chess on 3 boards simultaneously while someone's yelling random colour names at you. Some days nothing goes right. The paint's not cooperating. The colours mix into mud instead of the tone you wanted. Your hand is shaky, and lines that should be clean are wobbly. You're tired and frustrated, and the work is suffering for it. You step back and look at what you've done, and it's garbage. Complete garbage. You're having a small existential crisis about whether you're actually any good at this job, or if you've been fooling everyone, including yourself. You take a break, walk outside, get some air that doesn't smell like turpentine, come back with slightly better perspective. It's not as bad as you thought. It needs work, but it's fixable. You're mixing fresh paint and trying again. This time it goes better. Not perfect, but better. You're building it up gradually and it starts looking like something intentional instead of a mistake. Other days everything flows. Your hand is steady, The colours mix perfectly. The composition comes together like it was meant to be this way all along. You're in a state of focus where hours pass without notice. You look up and the light's fading, and you've accomplished more than you expected. These days are why you do this job, even though they're outnumbered by the frustrating days. Workshop visitors interrupt your flow. Other artists stopping by to see what you're working on, sharing gossip about who got which commission, who's in favour with which patron, merchants looking for decorative pieces to sell, patrons' representatives checking on progress, someone's cousin who wants to watch you paint because they find it interesting, and you're being polite while internally wishing they'd leave so you can concentrate. You're expected to be social and professional even when you're covered in paint and mentally deep in problem-solving mode. You're switching from artist brain to diplomat brain, explaining your work, discussing timing, being charming and confident. Then they leave, and you're switching back, trying to remember exactly what you were doing and what you were planning to do next. Legal disputes are more common than you'd like. A patron refuses to pay the agreed amount because he's decided the painting isn't quite what he wanted, despite it matching the contract exactly. You're arguing your case, possibly taking it to guild mediators or even civil courts. This costs time and possibly money for legal representation. Meanwhile, you're not getting paid and you've got material costs to cover and rent due. Another artist accuses you of stealing his design. You both painted similar compositions because you're both working from the same traditional iconography, but he's claiming you copied him specifically. This is ridiculous, but now you're defending yourself, showing your preparatory sketches, explaining your process. The guild investigates and eventually dismisses it, but you've lost days to this nonsense, and your reputation took a minor hit from even being accused. Copyright doesn't exist as a concept. Once a painting's sold, the patron owns it, and can do whatever he wants with it, including having copies made by cheaper painters. You're watching inferior versions of your work circulate, and there's nothing you can do. Your style gets imitated by other artists, because that's just how the profession works. Everyone's borrowing and adapting from everyone else. It's collaborative in a way, but also means your innovations don't stay yours for long. Workshop accidents happen. You knock over a jar of expensive pigment and it shatters, spilling powder across the floor. You're on your hands and knees trying to salvage what you can, but most of it's contaminated with floor dirt and unusable. That's money literally spilled on the ground. You're angry at yourself for being clumsy and calculating how much this mistake just cost you. A candle tips over, fortunately onto a stone surface, and not into a pile of oily rags. But you had a brief moment of pure terror imagining the entire workshop going up in flames. You're more careful about candle placement after that, but the awareness that you're working in a fire hazard never quite leaves the back of your mind. Assistants make mistakes too. One drops a panel you'd prepared and it cracks. That's days of work ruined. You're furious, but you're also trying to be fair because accidents happen. You're explaining firmly how to carry panels properly and why this matters. He's apologetic and genuinely upset because he knows he's just cost you time and material. You're all absorbing the loss and moving on because there's nothing else to do. The physical workspace deteriorates over time. The floor gets more stained. The walls need repairing where plaster's cracking. The windows get drafty as the frames age. You're doing basic maintenance yourself to save money, patching holes, replacing broken fixtures. You're not a carpenter, but you're learning basic repairs out of necessity. The result is functional, but not pretty. Rats appear occasionally because urban buildings have rats. You're hearing them in the walls at night, scratching and squeaking. You set traps and catch some, but there are always more. They're getting into your food stores if you're not careful. You're storing everything in sealed containers, or hung from the ceiling where they can't reach. The presence of rats is just another layer of medieval charm that wears thin very quickly. The smell of rat droppings adds to the workshop's complex bouquet of scents. You're cleaning them up regularly, sweeping the floor, trying to stay ahead of the problem, but they're persistent and you're fighting a losing battle against nature's determination to infiltrate human spaces. You're accepting that some level of pest presence is inevitable and just managing it as best you can. Seasonal changes affect your work beyond just temperature. Spring is wet, which means humidity affects how paint dries. Everything takes longer. The dampness gets into wood panels and they can warp if you're not careful. Summer's heat and bright light are actually ideal for painting, except for the aforementioned sweating and discomfort. Autumn is perfect, mild temperatures and good light. Winter is dark and cold and you're producing less work because the conditions are fighting you. Religious feast days mean mandatory breaks. The workshops close. You're attending services because that's expected. Some of these holy days are actually welcome rest. Others come at inconvenient times when you're in the middle of something time-sensitive. You're fretting about deadlines while sitting through a service, which probably isn't the spiritual mindset you're supposed to have, but you can't turn off the work anxiety. The social calendar of the city affects your business. When wealthy families are in town, commissions flow. When they retreat to country estates for summer, or because there's sickness in the city, work dries up. You're dependent on factors completely outside your control. Plague rumors can clear out your patron base in days, leaving you with no income and mounting expenses. Political instability affects everything. City-states are constantly in conflict. Alliances shift. Leaders change. When the political situation is unstable, wealthy people are cautious about spending. Commissions slow down. You're hearing rumors about wars and wondering if you should leave the city or ride it out. Usually you stay because moving is expensive and difficult, but there's background anxiety about whether this is the right choice. Taxes are inevitable and confusing. You're paying various fees to the city, the guild, possibly a landlord. Tax collectors come around and you're never quite sure if you're being charged the right amount or being taken advantage of. Record keeping is your responsibility, and you're not great at it. You've got a ledger where you're supposed to write income and expenses, but it's not particularly organized. Come tax time, you're doing panicked accounting and hoping you've got enough set aside to cover what you owe. Money management is a constant challenge. Income is irregular. A large commission pays well, but might be months between payment installments. Small jobs pay quickly but don't cover major expenses. You're always calculating what you can afford to spend versus what you need to save. Living close to the financial edge is normal. Most artisans are one bad month away from serious problems. Credit exists in the form of debts between individuals. You owe the pigment supplier for the last purchase, and he's letting you pay it off over time because you're a regular customer. You're tracking what you owe whom and who owes you. The apprentice borrowed money last month and is paying you back in labour. The baker downstairs trades bread for a painted sign. It's a complex web of informal arrangements that you're mentally tracking. Old age is a looming concern because this job is physically demanding and you can't do it forever. Your hands will eventually get too stiff or shaky for fine detail work. Your eyes will worsen. Your back will give out. Successful painters accumulate enough wealth to support themselves later, or they train assistants who eventually take over the work while sharing profits. Unsuccessful painters end up destitute or dependent on family or guild charity. There's no pension or retirement plan. You're saving what you can and hoping it's enough. Health problems accumulate from years of exposure. The chronic cough gets worse. joint pain becomes constant. Your hands develop a tremor that makes fine work harder. You're slowing down and producing less, which means earning less, which creates financial pressure exactly when you're least able to handle it. This is the reality facing every painter who survives long enough to get old in this profession. Client relationships require ongoing maintenance even after a commission is complete. You're checking in with past patrons, making sure they're happy with how the painting's aging, offering to do touch-ups if needed. This builds loyalty and leads to repeat business. A satisfied patron recommends you to friends and relatives. One good connection can sustain you for years if you maintain it properly. You're attending events where your patrons will be present, making conversation, staying visible in their social circles. You're walking a line between professional courtesy and being intrusive. You want them to remember you exist when they need another painting, but you don't want to be annoying. It's a social dance that requires reading people and situations accurately. Wealthy patrons sometimes default on payments and there's limited recourse. They're powerful and you're not. Pushing too hard for payment risks offending them and damaging your reputation. Being too passive means you don't get paid. You're sending polite reminders that become slightly firmer over time, hoping they'll pay before you have to escalate to formal complaints. Usually they eventually pay, sometimes months late, because even nobles care about their reputation for honoring debts. Sometimes you're building a portfolio of work, though that's not what it's called yet. You're keeping drawings and small studies that demonstrate your skill. When potential patrons visit, you're showing them examples of previous work. Some finished paintings are in churches or public buildings where people can see them. Your reputation spreads through word of mouth and visible examples. Marketing is personal and local and depends heavily on relationships. Competition with younger painters is increasingly noticeable as you age. They've got energy and new ideas and they're hungry for commissions. They're undercutting your prices or offering faster completion times. You've got experience and established relationships, but the pressure from below is real. You're adapting your style to stay current while not abandoning what makes your work distinctive. The art world is small enough that everyone knows everyone's business. Who got which commission, how much they charged, whether the patron was happy. Gossip flows through workshops and guild meetings. Reputations are built and destroyed through accumulated stories. One spectacular failure can haunt you for years. One major success can elevate your status permanently. Technical innovation happens slowly. New pigments appear occasionally when someone imports a material from distant places. New binding mediums get experimented with. Techniques for creating effects like realistic flesh tones or atmospheric perspective develop through trial and error shared across workshops. You're learning from others and contributing your own discoveries. Progress is collaborative and incremental. Oil painting techniques are still being refined in your lifetime. Earlier painters used tempera exclusively. The shift to oils opens new possibilities for blending and layering and color depth. You're part of this transition, learning oil techniques from others who learned from Flemish painters who developed them. You're figuring out drying times and glazing methods through practice. Some experiments work beautifully, others are disasters that teach you what not to do. The professional knowledge accumulates through years of practice. You know which pigments are stable together and which react badly. You know how thick paint can be applied before it cracks as it dries. You know how to build up skin tones through successive transparent layers. You know tricks for creating the illusion of different textures. This knowledge is valuable, and you guard it to some degree, though you're also teaching it to apprentices because that's how the system works. Teaching is part of the job if you've got workshop assistants. You're explaining techniques, demonstrating methods, correcting mistakes. Some students pick things up quickly, others need concepts explained multiple ways before they understand. You're trying to be patient while also needing them to be productive, so they're contributing to workshop output and not just consuming resources and time. The apprentices, all grown men who chose this trade later in life, are learning everything from ground level. How to prepare panels, grind pigments, mix paint, handle brushes, understand composition, paint different subjects. It's overwhelming for them initially. You remember being at that stage, though your memories have probably gotten rosier with time. You're certainly more patient with them than your own teacher was with you. Payment for their learning is complicated. In theory, they're paying you through labor, working on the boring parts of paintings while learning. In practice, you're feeding them when they work through meals and occasionally advancing them small amounts of money. The relationship is part teacher-student, part employer-employee, part something else that doesn't quite fit modern categories. It works through mutual investment in their eventual success. Some assistants stay with you for years and become reliable, skilled painters in their own right. Others leave after learning basics to set up independently, which is fine and expected. Occasionally one surpasses you in skill or success, which is a complex emotional experience. Pride in having taught them mixed with envy of their success, mixed with awareness that this is the natural progression of generations. The painting community has a mix of cooperation and competition. You're competing for commissions, but you're also covering for each other when someone's sick or overloaded with work. You're lending materials in emergencies. You're sharing technical tips. You're collaborating on large projects that require multiple painters. The community supports itself because you're all facing similar challenges. Churches commission large altarpieces that require workshop teams. You're coordinating with other painters, dividing the work into sections, trying to maintain style consistency across panels painted by different hands. This requires planning and communication and compromise. You're subordinating your individual style somewhat to create a unified whole. It's frustrating, but also professionally important. These large public works increase your visibility and reputation. The physical scale of altarpieces is intimidating. You're working on panels taller than you are, requiring ladders and scaffolding. You're painting sections at awkward heights and angles. Your neck hurts from looking up. Your arms hurt from reaching above shoulder height. The work is slow and physically exhausting. When it's finally complete and installed, seeing it in place in the church is satisfying. The impact of the full composition, properly lit by windows, makes the months of difficult labour feel worthwhile. Sometimes patrons commission frescoes, which is painting directly on wet plaster and comes with its own set of challenges. You're working on walls and ceilings, which means scaffolding and neck strain for days on end. The plaster's drying while you paint, so you're racing against time. Mistakes can't easily be fixed. You're planning each section carefully because you get one chance. The pigment selection is limited to what's chemically compatible with wet plaster. The entire process is stressful and unforgiving. Fresco work means you're on site at the building, rather than in your comfortable workshop. You're painting in a partially constructed church or a palazzo where other work is happening simultaneously. Masons are working nearby, creating dust. Carpenters are building things, creating noise and sawdust. You're trying to focus on detailed painting while construction chaos happens around you. Your workspace is temporary and cramped. Your materials are at risk from other workers' activities. You're protecting your work surface and hoping nobody damages what you've already painted. Let's talk about the specific nightmare of painting portraits, which seems straightforward until you're actually doing it. Your patron sits for you. which means they're in your workshop taking up space and time while you sketch and paint. They can't sit still. Nobody can sit perfectly still for hours, but they're fidgeting constantly, scratching their nose, shifting weight, adjusting clothing. You're asking them politely to return to the original position, and they do for about 40 seconds before drifting again. The sitting sessions are awkward socially. You're working in intense concentration while they're sitting there with nothing to do except watch you and make conversation. They're asking questions about your process, telling you stories, offering opinions about the painting in progress. You're trying to be polite and engaged, while also needing to focus on getting the proportions of their face correct. Your brain is split between social performance and technical challenge, and neither is getting your full attention. Some patrons want to look better than they actually do, which you expected. Others have the opposite problem and think you're making them too attractive. They're offended that you've softened their wrinkles or trimmed their jowls, as if you've implied they're vain enough to want flattery. You're explaining that idealization is standard practice while mentally screaming, because there's no winning this situation. They want realism, but also they want to look good, and these goals are sometimes in direct conflict. Capturing a likeness is genuinely difficult. You're translating three-dimensional reality onto a flat surface using paint, and somehow it needs to look like the specific person sitting in front of you. Get the spacing between the eyes slightly wrong, and suddenly it doesn't look like them at all. Make the nose a bit too long and the whole face is off. You're measuring proportions with your brush held at arm's length, squinting, comparing angles, and hoping your eye is accurate. The patron's clothing presents its own challenges. They've worn their finest outfit, which is elaborate and detailed, and requires hours of painting to render properly. Heavy brocade with gold thread woven through, fur trim on the collar, jewellery that needs to sparkle convincingly, lace that has to show individual threads while also reading as delicate fabric. You're spending more time on the outfit than on the face, which feels backwards, but that's what the commission requires. Hands are notoriously difficult to paint. The patron's hands are part of the composition, resting on an armrest or holding an object. Hands have complex anatomy with bones and tendons visible under skin, multiple joints that need to bend convincingly, foreshortening issues when fingers point toward the viewer. You're struggling to make the hands look natural and properly proportioned. You've repainted them twice already, and they're still not quite right. Jewellery requires meticulous attention. That ring on their finger needs to catch light realistically. The gold needs to look like metal, not yellow paint. Any gemstones need to have the deep colour and internal light that makes them valuable. You're building up thin layers and adding tiny highlights, working on an area smaller than your thumbnail for an unreasonable amount of time. The patron will definitely notice if their expensive ring looks cheap in the painting. Background elements tell a story about the patron's status and interests. Books suggest learning. Musical instruments suggest culture. Windows showing landscapes suggest property ownership. You're including these elements according to the patron's requests, painting tiny background details that most viewers will barely glance at. That landscape through the window requires atmospheric perspective to look convincingly distant. Those book spines need legible lettering suggesting real titles. The patron has opinions about which side of their face looks better. They want to be painted from a 3/4 view showing their left side because they think their right profile is less flattering. You're setting up the composition to accommodate this preference while trying to maintain interesting visual balance. Portraiture is as much about managing egos as it is about painting skill. Multiple sittings are required because you can't complete a detailed portrait in one session. The patron needs to return several times, and coordinating schedules is difficult. They're busy with their own affairs. You're juggling multiple commissions. Finding mutually convenient times is like solving a puzzle. They cancel or arrive late, throwing off your schedule. You're sitting there with your prepared palette and good light, waiting, losing productive time. Between sittings, you're working from memory and sketches to continue sections that don't require the patron present. The clothing, background, hands in their current position. But you're constantly second-guessing yourself. Was that fold in the fabric quite like this? Were their fingers positioned exactly this way? You're making educated guesses and hoping they're accurate enough that nobody notices. The final sitting is for adjustments after the patron sees the nearly complete work. They want the mouth adjusted slightly. The eyes seem too serious. Can you make them friendlier? One eyebrow is higher than the other, which is accurate to their actual face, but they've never noticed this about themselves, and now they want it corrected. You're making tweaks while explaining that you're working with what exists, though you're being more diplomatic in your actual phrasing. Payment for portraits is often higher than religious works of similar size because you're capturing a specific person and dealing with all the associated complications. The patron is paying for your skill but also for your patience with their demands. The price reflects the difficulty of the work and the status of having one's portrait painted. Not everyone can afford it, which makes it a marker of wealth and importance. Preservation of portraits matters intensely to patrons. They're commissioning these paintings to be remembered, to pass down to descendants, to document their existence for posterity. You're using the best materials you can to ensure longevity. Quality wood panels that won't warp, stable pigments that won't fade, proper varnish to protect the surface. You're building something meant to last beyond your lifetime and theirs. Group portraits are exponentially more complicated. A family wants everyone painted together, which means coordinating multiple people's schedules and dealing with multiple sets of opinions. Children are included sometimes, though you're painting from descriptions if they're very young, aging them up to a more paintable age. The adults all need to look good and appropriately positioned by status. The composition needs to be balanced while respecting hierarchy. It's a logistical and artistic nightmare. The sittings for group portraits mean your workshop is full of people. They're talking amongst themselves, getting bored, wandering around looking at your things. You're trying to maintain order while making progress. Someone inevitably needs to leave partway through and you're working on other sections. It's chaos masquerading as a painting session. Self-portraits are occasional projects when you need to demonstrate skill or have downtime between commissions. Painting yourself requires a mirror or working from memory. The mirror shows everything reversed, which is confusing. You're trying to paint what you see while your hand movements are backwards. Your arm gets tired from holding the position to see your hand placement while also painting. The lighting changes as you work because you're moving between the mirror and the canvas. The economic reality of being a painter means you're constantly calculating whether you can afford to eat versus buying materials. That's not dramatic exaggeration. Some weeks are genuinely that tight. You've got money coming eventually from commissions in progress, but right now you need pigment, and the supplier wants payment, and you've also got to eat and pay rent. You're prioritizing, borrowing, delaying payment where possible, and generally performing financial acrobatics. Debt is normal and expected. Everyone owes someone something. You're keeping mental track of what you owe to the pigment seller, the brush maker, your landlord who's let you slide on rent until you get paid. You're also tracking who owes you, which patrons have outstanding balances, which fellow painters borrowed money for emergency supplies. It's a complex web of informal credit that somehow functions despite no formal banking infrastructure. for people at your level. The wealthier guild members act as informal bankers sometimes, lending money at interest to less established painters. You've borrowed from a more successful painter to cover a cash flow gap, and you're paying it back with a percentage added. The interest is steep, but you didn't have other options. This is how the system works. Those with capital lend to those without, extracting profit while providing necessary liquidity. You're trying to avoid borrowing when possible because the interest eats into your already thin margins. Bartering is common for smaller transactions. You paint a sign for the baker and receive bread for a month. You create a small devotional painting for the landlord and get a month's rent forgiven. You trade a portrait sketch for a doctor's services when you're sick. Cash is often in short supply, so goods and services substitute. It's inefficient compared to modern monetary systems, but it works. The lack of financial security means any unexpected expense is a crisis. You need new boots because your current ones have holes, and that's money you'd planned for supplies. You get sick and can't work for a week, which means no progress on commissions and potentially missing deadlines. A tool breaks and needs replacing immediately. These aren't catastrophes in the grand scheme, but they're stressful when you're living close to the edge financially. Storage of wealth is complicated. You can't just have a bank account. Whatever money you have is hidden in your room, probably in a locked chest if you can afford one. This makes you a potential robbery target. You're keeping most of your wealth converted into materials or tools rather than cash for this reason. That stock of expensive pigments represents your savings account. Those quality brushes are an investment that holds value. The guild sometimes acts as a cooperative, pooling resources for bulk purchases that individual painters couldn't afford alone. A large shipment of lapis lazuli arrives and several painters split the cost and quantity. This gives you access to expensive materials while spreading the financial burden. It also means negotiating with other painters about fair division and managing group finances, which is its own headache. Quality of life varies wildly based on current financial situation. When you've just been paid for a major commission, you're eating better meals, buying needed supplies without agonizing over costs, maybe even purchasing a luxury like new clothing. When you're between payments and waiting on slow-paying patrons, you're eating basic bread and cheese, making supplies stretch, worrying about upcoming expenses. Your lifestyle oscillates between modest comfort and genuine anxiety. The dream is achieving financial stability, where you're not constantly stressed about money, owning your workspace instead of renting, having enough saved to weather slow periods, charging higher prices because your reputation commands it. Most painters never reach this level. They spend their careers hustling for the next commission, managing debt, and hoping nothing goes seriously wrong. The successful minority who achieve stability are anomalies, not the norm. Workshops sometimes share space to split costs. You're renting half a large room while another painter has the other half. You're sharing the expense of the space while maintaining separate businesses. This requires compatible working styles and personalities. Your workshop mate grinds pigments early in the morning, and the noise wakes you, but you can't complain much because you're both benefiting from the arrangement. You're learning to tolerate each other's quirks for economic necessity. Supply shortages happen when trade routes are disrupted. A war interrupts the flow of lapis lazuli, and suddenly ultramarine is even more expensive and scarce. You're working around the shortage, substituting azurite for less critical blues, disappointing patrons who specifically wanted ultramarine. Political situations far away affect your daily work in tangible ways. You're dependent on international trade networks that you have zero control over. Weather affects everything in ways modern people don't experience. Heavy rains make streets impassable, and deliveries are delayed. Your pigment order is sitting in a warehouse across town, but the carter won't risk the muddy roads. Extreme cold means your oil paints stiffen and become unusable without warming them, which requires careful heating that doesn't damage them. Summer heat accelerates drying times and you're adjusting techniques to compensate. You're working with natural materials in natural conditions and everything's variable. Color matching across sessions is difficult when working conditions change. You mixed a particular flesh tone last week in overcast light, and today it's bright sun, and the color looks completely different. You're trying to match it by memory and careful comparison, but slight variations creep in. In the finished painting, there might be subtle shifts in tone that reveal it was painted over multiple days in different lighting. You're trying to minimize this, but perfection is impossible. The grinding of pigments produces different results based on how finely you crush them. Some colors need very fine grinding to achieve their true hue. Others are better slightly coarse. You're learning through experience which pigments need what treatment. Grind vermilion too finely and it shifts darker. Grind it too coarse and it's gritty and uneven. You're feeling the texture between your fingers, making judgments based on touch and experience. Binding mediums affect working properties and final appearance. Egg tempera dries quickly and gives a matte finish. Oil allows longer working time and dries to a slight sheen. Different oils have different drying speeds and yellowing characteristics. Linseed oil is standard, but it yellows over time. Walnut oil yellows less but dries slower. You're choosing based on the specific requirements of each painting, balancing various factors. The layering process in oil painting requires patience you don't always have. You want to keep working, but the paint needs to dry to a specific tackiness before the next layer. Too wet and layers mix into mud. Too dry and they don't bond properly. You're testing with a fingertip, checking if it's ready, trying not to damage what's there. When it's right, you're continuing. When it's not, you're waiting and working on something else. Glazing creates depth and luminosity by applying transparent color layers over opaque underlayers. You're mixing pigment with lots of medium to create a translucent film. You're applying it carefully and evenly, avoiding brush strokes that would show. Multiple glazes build up rich, complex color that has dimension impossible to achieve in a single layer. It's time-consuming and technically demanding, but the results are beautiful. Apprentice supervision requires attention you're also trying to use for your own work. One assistant is mixing paint and getting the proportions wrong. You're stopping your work to check his mixture, showing him again how to achieve the right consistency. Another is preparing a panel and rushing the sanding. You're explaining again that the surface must be perfectly smooth, or every imperfection will show through the paint. You're teaching the same lessons repeatedly because learning takes time and repetition. The assistants have different aptitudes. One has a natural eye for color and mixes pigments intuitively. Another is methodical and excels at detailed repetitive work like painting backgrounds. You're assigning tasks based on their strengths while trying to develop their weaknesses. It's workforce management combined with teaching, and you're doing it while also being a productive painter yourself. Personality conflicts arise in close working quarters. Two assistants don't get along and they're making passive-aggressive comments while working side by side. You're mediating like a frustrated parent, reminding them that personal feelings don't matter and the work must continue. You didn't sign up to manage interpersonal drama, but here you are, trying to maintain workshop harmony so productivity doesn't suffer. Workshop hierarchy is usually clear. You're the master. The experienced painters are senior assistants. The newer ones are junior. Everyone knows their place and what they're responsible for. Occasionally someone resents their position and thinks they should have more responsibility or better tasks. You're having awkward conversations about why they're not ready yet, trying to be encouraging, while also being realistic about their current skill level. The physical workspace needs organization that constantly degrades. You establish a system where each type of brush has a specific container. Pigments are arranged by color. Tools have designated spots. Within days, the system falls apart as people put things back in the wrong place, or don't put them back at all. You're re-establishing order, explaining again why organization matters, and accepting that you'll be doing this forever. Cleaning the workspace is an ongoing battle. Paint chips and dust accumulate on every surface. Dried paint on pallets needs scraping. Containers need washing. The floor needs sweeping multiple times daily. You're assigning cleaning tasks to assistants who consider it beneath them, which you understand because you felt the same way years ago, but the work still needs doing. Nobody becomes a painter because they love cleaning, yet cleaning is a substantial portion of the job. Ventilation is poor because windows can't be open when it's cold or rainy, which is often. You're working in a closed room breathing fumes from solvents, drying oils and various chemical reactions happening in your pigments. The air is thick with it. Your eyes water. Your throat scratchy. You step outside for fresh air and the contrast is dramatic. The city air smells terrible by objective standards, but compared to workshop fumes it's remarkably clean. Long-term exposure to materials is definitely affecting you. That persistent cough isn't getting better. Your hands shake slightly even when you're rested. You're more tired than you used to be after the same amount of work. These are warning signs that you're vaguely aware of but mostly ignore, because what's the alternative? Stop painting. This is your livelihood and your identity. You're continuing despite physical complaints. Other painters show similar symptoms. The older ones have tremors, respiratory issues, general poor health. There's an accepted understanding that painters aren't the healthiest group. Some materials are known to be particularly nasty. Lead white is recognized as dangerous, but it's also the best white pigment available and absolutely necessary. You're using it carefully, trying not to ingest it, knowing you're still being exposed. Mercury from vermilion and cinnabar affects the mind as well as body. Painters who work extensively with red pigments sometimes develop personality changes, tremors, memory problems. There's a dark joke in the guild about red painters going mad. It's funny until you're working with vermilion every day and wondering if that forgotten conversation actually happened or if you're imagining things. You're probably fine. Probably. Arsenic in some yellow and green pigments is poison. This much is known. You're being careful not to eat while working with these colours, washing your hands thoroughly after. But the dust still gets in your lungs. The powder still contacts your skin. Careful isn't the same as safe, but safer is the best you can manage while still doing the work. Lead poisoning develops slowly with symptoms that seem unrelated. Stomach pain, headaches, joint pain, fatigue. These are also symptoms of just living a physically demanding life in uncomfortable conditions. Distinguishing between normal occupational discomfort and actual poisoning is impossible without modern medical knowledge. You're assuming you're fine while accumulating heavy metals in your tissues. The awareness that this job is slowly damaging you exists in the back of your mind, but doesn't change behavior much. You need to work to eat. Painting is what you know. The damage is gradual enough that any individual day doesn't seem dangerous. It's the cumulative effect over years that's the problem, and humans are terrible at responding to slow-moving threats. So you're continuing, being somewhat careful, and hoping you're one of the lucky ones who stays relatively healthy. Guild members who become seriously ill from material exposure sometimes receive support, but it's limited. The guild provides some financial assistance and possibly a pension of sorts. It's not enough to live comfortably, but it's better than nothing. This is the safety net, and it's not particularly reassuring when you're young and healthy, but you're paying dues partly to fund it. Injuries from painting are usually minor but annoying. Cuts from blades used to scrape paint or trim panels, burns from hot wax or candles, splinters from wooden surfaces, strained muscles from awkward positions. These happen regularly, and you're treating them yourself with wine for cleaning and cloth for binding. They heal, and you accumulate a collection of small scars that mark your profession as surely as the paint under your fingernails. Repetitive stress injuries develop from painting motions repeated thousands of times. Your wrist hurts from the specific angle you hold brushes. Your elbow has a tender spot from resting on the work surface. Your shoulder protests certain movements. These aren't dramatic injuries, but chronic low-level pain that's always present. You're adjusting your technique slightly to minimize discomfort, working around your body's limitations. Vision problems develop as you age, partly from natural aging and partly from decades of close detail work in imperfect light. You're squinting more, holding things at different distances to see them clearly. Eventually you reach a point where fine detail work becomes genuinely difficult. This is career limiting in a profession where detail is crucial. You're adapting by focusing on areas that don't require the finest touch, or by delegating detailed sections to assistants with younger eyes. The awareness that your career has a physical time limit creates some urgency. You're not going to be able to do this forever. Your best work needs to happen while you're still capable of it. You're pushing yourself to be productive while you can, to establish your reputation and financial security before your body makes painting impossible. This adds pressure to an already demanding profession. Artistic vision versus patron demands is a constant tension. You have ideas about composition and color that would make the painting better, but the patron wants specific elements arranged in specific ways. You're trying to satisfy their requirements while also creating something that works artistically. Sometimes these goals align, often they don't, and you're compromising your vision to meet the contract specifications. Explaining artistic choices to people without artistic training is exhausting. The patron doesn't understand why you positioned a figure at that angle or chose that particular background color. You're justifying decisions based on principles of balance and color harmony and visual flow. They're nodding, but clearly not following, and then they're still requesting changes that would unbalance the composition. You're finding diplomatic ways to say no, while offering alternative solutions. Sometimes you're overruled and have to execute the patron's vision even though you know it's wrong. That Madonna they want positioned in the corner creates awkward, empty space in the composition. The color scheme they've insisted on is muddy and unpleasant. You're doing it anyway because they're paying, and ultimately it's their painting. You're just hoping nobody realizes you painted it, because it doesn't represent your best judgment. Artistic reputation is built partly on work you're proud of, and partly on work you did because you needed the money. Not every commission is an opportunity for creative expression. Some are just jobs. Paint this saint, make him look like the traditional iconography. Finish on time, collect payment. You're executing competently but without passion. These pieces don't advance your artistic development, but they keep you fed. The paintings you care about personally are often not the ones that get the most attention. You created a small panel of a landscape that you're genuinely proud of, experimenting with atmospheric effects. Nobody's particularly interested. The rushed portrait of a minor merchant gets displayed prominently, and people compliment it. The market doesn't always value what you value, which is frustrating but also just reality. Trends in art change, and you're adapting or being left behind. Patrons are requesting styles they've seen in other cities or from other painters. You're learning new techniques to stay competitive. You're incorporating fashionable elements while trying to maintain your own identity. It's a balance between following trends for marketability and establishing a distinctive style that makes you memorable. Other art forms intersect with painting. Sculptors are creating altarpieces that include painted elements. You're coordinating with a sculptor on a project, figuring out where sculpture ends and painting begins. Architecture determines the space and lighting for paintings. You're designing work that fits specific architectural contexts. Textile arts influence patterns and designs in painted clothing. Everything's connected, and you're aware of these other crafts, even while focusing on painting. The social status of painters is ambiguous. You're not working with your body in the way a mason or carpenter does, but you're still working with your hands and getting dirty. You're creating luxury goods for wealthy people, but you're not wealthy yourself. You're educated enough to discuss theology and classical references, but you're not a scholar. You exist in a middle zone that's neither noble nor common labor, and society doesn't quite know how to classify you. This ambiguous status creates awkward social situations. At a patron's gathering, are you a guest or hired entertainment? You're treated as both depending on who's talking to you. Some wealthy people are genuinely interested in your knowledge and treat you as an intellectual peer. Others see you as a skilled servant, useful but not equal. You're code switching constantly, adapting your behavior to how you're being perceived in each interaction. The concept of artistic genius is emerging slowly during your lifetime. Earlier, painters were just craftsmen. Now, there's growing recognition that exceptional painters are doing something beyond mere craft. You're possibly benefiting from this shift if your work is good enough. The idea that an artist has special vision or talent that deserves recognition is becoming more accepted. This doesn't necessarily translate to better pay, but it does mean more respect. Written contracts protect both parties in theory. In practice, disputes still arise over interpretation. The contract specifies ultramarine for the Virgin's robes, but how much ultramarine? Does it need to be pure ultramarine, or can you mix it with other blues for less critical areas? You're arguing with a patron over contract language, both sides interpreting it to their advantage. This sometimes goes to guild mediation or legal judgment. Documentation of your work is limited. There are no photographs. Once a painting leaves your workshop, you have no record of it except memory and possibly sketches. If it's destroyed or lost, it's simply gone. Your body of work is scattered across various locations, and you're not even sure where all of it is anymore. That altarpiece you painted 8 years ago could have been damaged in a fire, and you'd never know. Signatures on paintings are not yet standard practice. Some painters sign work, others don't. Attribution is often uncertain. Your painting might be admired for generations with no one knowing you created it, or it might be incorrectly attributed to someone more famous. The modern concept of authorship and artistic identity is developing but not fully established. Your ego wants recognition, but the system doesn't consistently provide it. Workshop productions blur individual authorship anyway. You designed and painted the faces, an assistant painted the background, another did the clothing. Who's the artist? By convention you are, as the master. But multiple hands contributed, and someone examining the finished piece might notice variations in quality or technique between different sections. Workshop pieces are collaborative, even when they bear one painter's reputation. Forgery isn't quite the concept it becomes later, but copying definitely exists. A popular composition gets copied by multiple workshops. Your design for a Madonna and Child gets reproduced by other painters with minor variations. There's no copyright protection. Good ideas spread rapidly through the painter community. You're simultaneously copying others' innovations and having your own copied. It's collaborative in an uncontrolled way. Sacred art carries religious significance that affects how you approach it. You're not just painting pictures, you're creating objects of devotion. People will pray before you're painting. It will be part of religious ceremonies. This responsibility weighs differently on different painters. Some take it very seriously, approaching the work with reverence. Others see it as a job, executing religious subjects with technical skill but without particular piety. You're probably somewhere in between. The iconography must be correct because these images teach religious stories to illiterate people. The Virgin Mary's blue robe isn't just a colour choice, it's symbolic and expected. St. Peter's keys identify him immediately. Getting these details wrong means the painting fails at its educational function. You're memorizing symbolic attributes and traditional compositions, working within established visual language. Innovation within religious art is possible but limited. You can paint a traditional scene with new composition or technique, but the basic content is fixed. The Annunciation always has Mary and the angel Gabriel. You can position them differently, use unusual lighting, create interesting architectural backgrounds, but the fundamental subject doesn't change. Innovation happens in execution rather than content. Market days bring opportunities to sell smaller works directly. You're setting up a temporary display in the marketplace alongside other artisans. The smaller devotional paintings and portraits you've created speculatively are laid out for browsing. People are handling them, asking prices, negotiating. You're acting as your own salesman, which requires different skills than painting. You're being friendly and persuasive, talking up the quality of materials and your reputation. The market crowd is diverse. Some are genuinely interested buyers with money. Others are browsing with no intention to purchase. Street thieves are eyeing your displayed work and you're watching carefully. The weather's either too hot or threatening rain, and you're protecting paintings from sun exposure or water. Your back hurts from standing all day. Your voice is getting hoarse from talking to dozens of people. Haggling is expected, and you're negotiating every sale. They offer half your asking price. You counter with a small discount. They claim they can get similar work cheaper elsewhere. You're pointing out the quality of your pigments and technique. Eventually you agree on something between your price and theirs. Nobody pays the asking price. It's a dance everyone knows the steps to. Small sales provide immediate cash, which helps with short-term expenses. You're selling a small Madonna for enough to buy groceries for a week and some basic pigments. It's not the prestigious commission that builds your reputation, but it's money today rather than months from now. You need both types of work to survive. The small pieces keep you afloat while you wait for big commissions to pay out. Competition in the market is visible and immediate. Another painter has a stall nearby selling similar work for less. Their quality is lower, but their prices are attractive. You're watching potential customers compare your work to theirs. Some choose quality and buy from you. Others choose price and buy from them. You're resisting the urge to badmouth the competition while mentally noting that their ultramarine is clearly fake. Fake pigments are a real problem. Less scrupulous artists substitute cheap blue for real ultramarine, hoping patrons don't know the difference. Some don't, but others do, and you're building reputation partly on using genuine materials. You're pointing this out to customers, explaining how to identify real versus fake if they're interested. Most aren't particularly interested in technical details, they just want a nice painting at a good price. Weather damage to outdoor market displays is inevitable. A sudden rain shower sends you scrambling to cover paintings. The sun's bright exposure might affect colours in paintings left displayed for hours. The wind knocks over your display and you're catching paintings before they hit muddy ground. Market selling is stressful in ways that workshop painting isn't. You're exposed to elements and crowds and general chaos. Foot traffic patterns affect sales. A spot near the fountain where people gather is better than a corner location. You're arriving early to claim good positions. Other vendors are doing the same. There's low-level conflict over prime spots, resolved through combination of tradition, negotiation, and occasionally bribing the market official. You're paying a small fee for a better location and hoping increased sales justify the expense. Customer interactions range from pleasant to irritating. Some people appreciate your work and the conversation is enjoyable. Others are demanding and rude, treating you like a servant rather than a skilled artisan. You're maintaining professional courtesy while internally composing insulting responses you'll never say aloud. The customer might not always be right, but they're always the customer, so you're smiling through gritted teeth. Commissions sometimes originate from market encounters. Someone sees your work, likes it, and asks about commissioning something specific. You're discussing their needs, quoting prices, arranging follow-up meetings at your workshop. These connections are valuable. One market day might generate enough commission work to keep you busy for months. It's unpredictable, but it's why you're enduring the market's discomforts. Packing up at day's end is almost as much work as setting up. You're carefully wrapping unsold pieces, dismantling your display, carrying everything back to the workshop. You're tired, and your feet are killing you. Counting your earnings provides some satisfaction. Good days make the effort worthwhile. Bad days leave you wondering why you bothered. You'll be back next market day regardless because you need the income. Guild regulations govern some aspects of market selling. You're allowed to sell because you're a guild member in good standing. Non-members trying to sell paintings get shut down by guild enforcers. This protects your interests, but also means you're supporting a system that restricts competition. It's self-serving, but also ensures certain quality standards. Everyone selling paintings in this market has met guild requirements. Seasonal variations affect what sells. Religious paintings sell well before major holy days when people want devotional pieces. Portraits sell when wealthy families are in town. Small decorative works sell to merchants and prosperous craftsmen year-round. You're producing work with these patterns in mind, building inventory of pieces likely to sell during upcoming seasons. Storage of unsold inventory takes up workspace. You've got stacks of small paintings wrapped and stored, waiting for the right buyer or market day. They're taking up room you could use for active commissions. But you can't just discard them. They represent invested time and materials. You're managing inventory like any business, balancing production with sales. Damaged or failed paintings present a problem. That panel where the paint cracked as it dried is unsaleable. You can't fix it, and you can't sell it. The materials and time are just lost. You're either painting over it if the panel's salvageable or disposing of it. Failed pieces are part of the business, but they hurt financially and emotionally. Nobody wants to acknowledge their mistakes, but damaged work is concrete evidence of failure. Reputation management is constant. Every piece you sell represents your brand, though that's not the term used. Poor quality work damages your reputation and affects future sales. You're maintaining standards even for small pieces sold cheaply at market. The person buying a simple Madonna might know someone who needs an expensive altarpiece. You're treating every customer as a potential source of referrals. Word of mouth is the primary advertising. Satisfied patrons tell friends. Priests recommend you to wealthy parishioners. Other artisans mention you to customers. Bad word of mouth can destroy your business. One very unhappy patron telling everyone who'll listen that you're unreliable or unskilled does measurable damage. You're keeping people happy partly because it's professional and partly because your livelihood depends on reputation. The painting community is small enough that gossip travels fast. News of a major commission, a patron dispute, a technical failure, a personal scandal, everyone knows within days. You're living in a fishbowl where privacy barely exists. Your professional and personal life are both subject to community scrutiny and judgment. This enforces certain behavioral standards, but it's also suffocating. Personal life is limited by work demands. You're in the workshop from dawn to dark most days. Social activities are squeezed into evenings or feast days. Relationships suffer from your constant distraction and absence. You're mentally in your work even when physically present elsewhere. Partners and friends understand this, or they don't remain partners and friends. The job consumes you in ways that make normal life difficult. Let's discuss framing, which is a whole separate craft but often falls to you to arrange. Wooden frames are carved by specialist frame makers, or you're doing simpler frames yourself if the patron's budget is limited. The frame needs to complement and protect the painting without overwhelming it. Ornate gilded frames for important works, simple moulding for everyday pieces. You're coordinating with frame makers or carving basic frames with carpentry tools you're not expert in. Installing finished paintings on site requires travel and physical labour. You're transporting a large altarpiece through city streets to a church. The panel is heavy and awkward. You've hired assistants to help carry it, and you're all manoeuvring through narrow doorways and upstairs. Everyone's sweating and nervous about damaging months of work. You're directing the positioning, making sure it's properly secured to the wall or altar. On-site problems arise that weren't apparent in the workshop. The lighting's different than expected, and certain colours don't read well. The architectural space is slightly different than measurements indicated, and the painting doesn't fit quite right. You're problem-solving in the moment, sometimes doing touch-ups on location or adjusting the frame or the mounting. The patron's watching, and you're projecting confidence while internally panicking. The final reveal to the patron is a moment of high anxiety. They're seeing the completed work installed in its intended location for the first time. You're watching their face for reaction. Satisfaction means final payment and possibly future commissions. Disappointment means negotiations, possible alterations, delayed payment, damaged reputation. Most patrons are pleased because you've done good work. Some find things to criticize because people always find things to criticize. Payment of the final balance is relief and validation. You're collecting the remaining money owed, which you've been waiting months for in some cases. You're immediately calculating what this means for your financial situation. Debts you can pay off, materials you can buy, rent covered for the next months. The anxiety of uncertain income resolves into temporary security. You're already thinking about the next commission because the cycle continues. Maintenance of older paintings becomes your responsibility sometimes. A patron contacts you years after the original commission because the painting's damaged or dirty. You're visiting to assess the situation. Smoke damage from candles has darkened the varnish. You're cleaning it carefully with mild solvents, revealing the original colours. Touch-ups are needed where paint's flaked. You're matching colours to your own work from years ago, which is easier than matching someone else's but still challenging. Restoration work is delicate and risky. You're working on someone else's painting, possibly by a painter more skilled than you. You're trying to repair damage without making it worse or adding inappropriate elements. The ethics of restoration aren't well defined yet. How much can you alter while still claiming to restore? You're making judgment calls with limited guidance. Some restoration work is sensitive and invisible. Some is heavy-handed and changes the piece significantly. Transport of valuable paintings is nervous-making. You're wrapping a finished piece carefully for a patron who's taking it to another city. You're explaining how to protect it from moisture, impact, sunlight. You're hoping your instructions are followed and the painting arrives intact. Sometimes you're traveling with the painting yourself, accompanying it to ensure safe delivery. This means days of travel, expense, time away from workshop. Travel for work takes you away from your familiar environment. You're in another city, staying at an inn that's not particularly clean or comfortable. The bed has questionable stains and the shared sleeping room is noisy. The food is strange and sits heavy in your stomach. You're dealing with different customs and dialect variations. You complete your business and return home as quickly as possible, grateful for your own uncomfortable but familiar lodgings. Collaboration with other artisans on large projects means coordinating with people who have different priorities and timelines. The marble worker is behind schedule, which delays when you can start your portion. The architect changes the design, requiring you to adjust your painting to fit new dimensions. The metal worker who's creating candlesticks for the altar has opinions about your color choices and whether they'll look good with brass. Everyone's protecting their own work while trying to create a cohesive whole. Artistic temperaments clash in these collaborations. Everyone thinks their contribution is the most important. The sculptor doesn't want painted elements distracting from his carving. You don't want the sculpture overpowering your painting. You're negotiating and compromising while maintaining your artistic vision. Sometimes this results in genuine collaboration, where different elements enhance each other. Sometimes it's a mess where everyone's working against each other. Church politics affect religious commissions. Different factions within a church have different preferences. You're caught in the middle of disagreements about iconography or style. One group wants traditional compositions. Another wants modern innovations. You're trying to satisfy everyone and satisfying no one. The project becomes more about managing politics than creating art, which is exhausting and frustrating. Payments from church commissions are sometimes in goods rather than cash. You're receiving grain, wine, cloth, whatever the church has available. This is fine if you need these things or can trade them easily. It's annoying if you need cash specifically, and now you're finding buyers for church wine. Barter economy has advantages and disadvantages, and you're experiencing both simultaneously. Documentation of contracts in writing protects both parties, but requires literacy and legal knowledge. You're either literate enough to read contracts yourself, or you're having them read to you by someone you trust. The legal language is complex, and you're trying to understand exactly what you're agreeing to. Disputes later often hinge on interpretation of specific phrases. You're learning to be more careful about contract terms after a few bad experiences. Legal recourse for broken contracts exists, but is slow and expensive. Taking a patron to court costs money and time. The process drags on for months. You're paying a lawyer or advocate to represent you. Even if you win, collecting the judgment might be difficult if the patron's uncooperative. Many disputes are settled through guild mediation because it's faster and cheaper, though the results are less binding. Insurance concepts don't really exist. Risk is just something you absorb individually. Your workshop burns down, you've lost everything with no compensation. A painting's destroyed in transit. The loss is yours unless you can prove someone else's negligence. You're being extremely careful because there's no safety net. Modern risk management structures don't exist, and you're facing uncertainty without them. Diversification of income helps manage risk. You're not depending on single large commissions alone. You're doing smaller pieces, market sales, restoration work, teaching, whatever generates revenue. Multiple income streams mean if one dries up, you're not immediately destitute. This requires managing various activities simultaneously, which is chaotic but necessary for financial stability. Networking with wealthy families is relationship maintenance that never ends. You're attending social functions, sending greetings on important occasions, remembering details about their families and interests. You're being useful and present without being intrusive. These relationships are professional, but they're also genuinely social. Some patrons become actual friends over years of interaction. Others remain strictly transactional. The daily grind wears on you in ways that aren't dramatic but are cumulative. Another day of grinding pigments until your arm aches. Another conversation with a patron explaining why their impossible request is impossible. Another evening working by insufficient candlelight because the piece must be finished. The small frustrations add up to a background hum of stress that you're managing constantly. Physical discomfort is so constant you barely notice it anymore. Your back always hurts a little. Your hands are always slightly sore. Your eyes are always tired. This has become your baseline normal. You're only noticing when pain gets significantly worse. The everyday discomfort is just the price of working, and you're paying it daily without much conscious thought. Your body's sending distress signals that you've learned to mostly ignore. Mental fatigue from constant problem solving is as draining as physical work. Every painting presents dozens of small decisions. Which pigment mixture for this flesh tone? How to position this hand to look natural? What background color will make the figure stand out? Your brain's in constant problem-solving mode for hours daily. By evening, you're mentally exhausted, even if you haven't done heavy physical labor. Creative energy is finite, and you're learning to manage it like a resource. Morning when you're fresh is for difficult sections requiring full concentration. Afternoon is for mechanical work that's necessary but doesn't require peak creativity. You're pacing yourself through the day, matching task difficulty to available mental energy. Pushing too hard leads to mistakes and wasted work. You're learning when to stop for the day, even if light remains. Frustration with your own limitations is recurring. You can see in your mind how the painting should look, but your hands can't quite execute it perfectly. There's a gap between vision and ability that never fully closes. You're improving over years, but never reaching the ideal you're imagining. This gap is motivating and frustrating in equal measure. You're striving for something always just beyond reach. Other painters' work inspires and intimidates you. You see a piece by a contemporary that's extraordinarily good, and you're simultaneously admiring it and feeling inadequate. Why can't you paint like that? What are they doing that you're not? You're analyzing their technique, trying to learn, while also feeling competitive jealousy. These complex reactions to others' work are constant throughout your career. Artistic growth happens slowly and unevenly. You have breakthroughs where suddenly something clicks and you understand how to create an effect you've been struggling with. Then you plateau for months with no apparent progress. Growth isn't linear, and you're experiencing periods of advancement and stagnation unpredictably. You're trusting that continued work will lead to continued improvement, but it's not always obvious. Self-doubt creeps in during difficult stretches. Maybe you're not as talented as you thought. Maybe you've been fooling people and they're going to realize you're mediocre. Maybe you should have chosen a different profession. These thoughts are probably universal among artists, but they feel very personal and specific when you're experiencing them. You're pushing through doubt with stubborn persistence because what else can you do? Comparison to past masters is inevitable. The great painters from previous generations set standards you're measured against. You're trying to equal or surpass them while working with the same basic materials and techniques. Some days you feel you're contributing something new and valuable. Other days you feel like a poor imitation of better artists. Your actual quality is probably somewhere between these extremes, but your self-assessment swings wildly. Recognition from peers means more than patron satisfaction in some ways. Other painters understand the difficulty of what you're attempting. Their compliments carry weight because they're informed judgments. When a fellow painter whose work you admire says something positive about your painting, you're genuinely pleased in ways that patron compliments don't quite match. Professional respect from knowledgeable equals is deeply validating. Public reception is less informed but more widespread. Regular people viewing your work in churches have opinions based on immediate visual impact rather than technical understanding. They respond emotionally to the image without analyzing technique. This is valid and important feedback even if it's not sophisticated. You're creating art partly for educated patrons and partly for common viewers, and both audiences matter. The divide between sacred and secular work is significant. Religious paintings have spiritual purpose beyond aesthetics. Secular works like portraits are primarily about capturing likeness and displaying wealth. You're approaching these different categories with different mindsets. Sacred work carries weight of religious meaning. Secular work is more straightforward commercial transaction. Both are valid, but they feel different to create. Mythological subjects are becoming more popular with humanist patrons interested in classical themes. You're painting Venus and Apollo and various nymphs and heroes from ancient stories. This requires different iconography than religious work. You're researching classical sources, looking at ancient sculptures, developing visual vocabulary for pagan subjects. It's intellectually stimulating and also potentially risky if church authorities consider it inappropriate. Nudity in mythological paintings is more acceptable than in most religious contexts. You're painting unclothed figures with less concern about propriety because the classical subject matter provides justification. The technical challenge of rendering the human body is interesting and difficult. You're building up layers to create the appearance of skin, suggesting muscle and bone beneath. When it works, painted flesh looks alive and warm. When it doesn't, it looks like beige paint shaped like a person. Color theory is developing through practice and shared knowledge. Certain colors placed together create visual vibration or harmony. Warm colors advance, cool colors recede, creating illusion of depth. Complementary colors intensify each other. You're learning these principles experientially rather than through formal instruction. Your eye learns what works through trial and observation. The rules are being discovered and codified by practitioners like yourself. Perspective systems are being developed and refined during your lifetime. Mathematical rules for creating illusion of three-dimensional space on flat surfaces. Vanishing points and horizon lines and foreshortening calculations. This transforms painting by making convincing spatial illusion possible. You're learning these techniques and applying them. The results are dramatic compared to older flat compositions. Space becomes believable, and figures inhabit it convincingly. Architectural backgrounds require perspective knowledge and careful measurement. You're constructing imaginary buildings that follow perspective rules, so they look plausible. Columns recede properly. Floor tiles diminish according to mathematical proportion. The architecture creates space that figures occupy naturally. Getting this right requires planning and precision. Getting it wrong creates spatial confusion that undermines the whole painting. Landscape backgrounds are usually secondary to figures but still require skill. The distant hills need atmospheric perspective, becoming bluer and lighter as they recede. Trees and vegetation need to look natural without requiring botanical accuracy. The sky transitions from horizon to zenith believably. You're creating convincing environments for your figures without letting background overwhelm the main subject. Final varnishing is the last step that protects and unifies the painting. You're applying clear varnish over the fully dried paint, which brings up color saturation and provides a protective layer. The varnish needs to be applied evenly without brushstrokes or bubbles. You're working in good light, flowing the varnish on smoothly, watching for drips or thin spots. The transformation as varnish goes on is satisfying. Colors deepen and the surface gains coherence. Drying time for varnish means the painting's not quite finished, even after varnish application. It needs to dry in a dust-free environment, or particles settle into the sticky surface. You're protecting it carefully while the varnish cures. Any disturbance creates permanent marks. You've learned this through painful experience of having to strip varnish and reapply it after something marred the surface. Packing for delivery requires protective wrapping. You're using cloth and sometimes wooden crates for valuable pieces. The wrapping needs to protect from moisture, impact and dirt during transport. You're padding corners and edges where damage is most likely. For extremely valuable works, you're building custom crates that immobilize the painting completely. The packing materials cost money, but a necessary insurance against transport damage. Delivery to patrons is ceremonial for important commissions. You're presenting the finished work formally, uncovering it with some flourish. The patrons seeing months of your work culminating in this moment. Their reaction determines whether this project ends well. You're confident in the work, but still nervous. Even good paintings can disappoint if they don't match the patron's mental image. Usually it goes well. The patron's pleased, you're paid, everyone's satisfied. Documentation of completion means the commission's officially done. Contracts are marked fulfilled. Final payments are recorded. Any warranties or guarantees about the work are noted. You're closing out the project administratively, which is less interesting than painting, but necessary. Your records show what you've completed, when, for whom, for how much. This protects both parties if questions arise later. Post-completion relationship maintenance continues. You're checking in after delivery to ensure satisfaction. Minor issues might need addressing. The painting might need adjusting once installed in its permanent location. You're available for these tweaks as part of professional service. This also keeps you in the patron's mind for future commissions. The relationship continues beyond the specific project. Reputation effects from completed work spread slowly. People see the painting in church or the patron's home. They ask who painted it. Your name circulates among the wealthy and influential. This generates future opportunities, sometimes months or years later. Someone remembers seeing your work and contacts you when they need a painter. Your past work is your ongoing advertisement. Workshop maintenance after completing major projects means restocking and reorganizing. You've depleted pigment supplies, and they need replenishing. Tools need cleaning and repair. The workspace needs proper cleaning. After intense project focus, let things slide. You're taking time between commissions to reset everything for the next project. This maintenance work is necessary but feels unproductive when you're eager to start new work. Rest between major projects is necessary, but you're bad at it. You're so accustomed to constant work that relaxing feels wrong. You take a day off and spend it anxious about not working. Your identity is tied up in being productive. Genuinely resting requires conscious effort and feels uncomfortable. You're perhaps not the healthiest relationship with work, but this is common among serious artisans. Planning future projects happens in downtime. You're sketching ideas, thinking about compositions you want to try, imagining paintings not yet commissioned. This creative dreaming is part of the process. Some ideas will become real commissions, others remain sketches and thoughts. The mental work of imagining is as important as the physical work of execution, though less visible. Financial planning means looking ahead to anticipated income and expenses. You're expecting payment from a commission next month, which will cover rent and materials for the next project. You're planning purchases based on expected cash flow. If payments are delayed, your plans fall apart and you're scrambling. Living project to project financially is stressful and requires constant attention. Long-term goals exist, but are somewhat abstract. You want to establish workshop with multiple assistants. You want to receive major public commissions. You want financial security and professional respect. These goals motivate daily work, but the path to achieving them is unclear. You're working consistently and hoping opportunity and quality lead to success. There's no guaranteed career progression, just persistent effort and some luck. Aging brings awareness that time is limited. You're not going to paint forever. Your productive years are finite. This creates urgency to accomplish what you can while you're able. You're pushing yourself perhaps harder than is healthy because you're aware the window is closing. The physical decline is gradual but real, and you're racing against it. Younger painters emerging represent both future of the profession and competition for you. They've got energy and new ideas. They're learning from your generation's innovations and building on them. You're simultaneously supporting them as colleagues and competing with them for work. This dual relationship is complicated. You're generous with some knowledge and protective of other secrets. Technical innovations you develop are your competitive advantage temporarily. That particular method for creating luminous skin tones, the way you mix and apply glazes, these are trade secrets that make your work distinctive. Eventually others figure out similar techniques, but for a while you've got an edge. You're balancing sharing knowledge with protecting your advantage. Workshop practices you've refined over years are valuable knowledge. The efficient workflow, the material preparation methods, the quality control systems, these make you productive and consistent. New painters are less efficient because they haven't developed these practices yet. Experience has value beyond just painting skill. You're faster and more reliable because you've made all the mistakes already and learned from them. Satisfaction from the work is real despite all the complaints. Creating something beautiful from raw materials is genuinely fulfilling. Solving visual problems exercises your mind. Seeing a composition come together provides deep satisfaction. The difficulties are real, but so are the rewards. You're complaining about the job constantly, while also being unable to imagine doing anything else. The painting community provides identity and belonging. You're part of a tradition stretching back generations and continuing forward. You're contributing to something larger than yourself. The shared knowledge, the common struggles, the collective advancement of technique. You're part of this ongoing collaborative effort. It's meaningful in ways that transcend individual paintings. Legacy considerations become important eventually. What are you leaving behind? Your best paintings might outlast you by centuries. Future painters might study your work and learn from it, or everything might be lost to time and you'll be forgotten. You can't control this, but you're doing your best work partly in hope of being remembered. The desire for lasting impact motivates pushing through difficulty.